What if the one question you've spent your entire life chasing had no answer? Or worse, what if the answer had been in front of you all along, but you never stopped long enough to see it? We live in a world that craves answers. We want solutions, explanations, clarity. But what if wisdom isn't about finding the right answers, but about learning to ask the right questions? This is the story of Kaito, a young monk who spent years searching for wisdom under the guidance of his master, Run. He believed that knowledge was the key to enlightenment, that the more he learned, the wiser he would become. But one day, his master made him an offer. Tomorrow, I will answer one last question for you. Choose wisely. A lifetime of seeking, condensed into a single moment. What should he ask? What question could truly change everything? That night, Kaito sat awake, his mind racing. He had spent 10 years pursuing truth, yet now, faced with the chance to ask his final question, he realized something unsettling. He didn't even know where to begin. Every question he considered felt too small, too insignificant to capture the depth of his search. By the time the sun rose, he had made his choice, and what happened next would forever transform his understanding of wisdom. This is a story about questions, answers, and the silence between them. But before we begin, take a moment to reflect. What is the most important question in your life right now? Hold on to it as we journey together. By the end, you may find that you no longer need an answer. If this story resonates with you, consider giving it a thumbs up. It tells me you're here and helps others discover these transformative lessons too. And if you're ready to explore the power of wisdom and the art of asking the right questions, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because sometimes the greatest lessons are not in the answers we seek, but in the questions we never think to ask. Now, let's begin. From the moment Kaito arrived at the monastery, he was obsessed with finding answers. As a young man, he had left behind everything, his family, his village, his past, to dedicate himself to a life of spiritual learning. He believed that if he studied hard enough, meditated long enough, and asked the right questions, he would eventually unlock the great truths of life. And so, every day, he approached his master, Run, with new questions. Master, what is the meaning of life? Master, how do I find true peace? Master, what happens after death? Each time, Run would simply smile and respond with another question. What do you think? What is life to you? Why do you seek peace instead of understanding the chaos? At first, Kaito thought this was just a teaching method, guiding him toward his own realizations. But as years passed, frustration grew within him. No matter how many books he read or how many hours he meditated, the great mysteries of life still eluded him. One evening, after a decade of studying under Run, Kaito sat by the temple gardens, gazing at the stars. He had dedicated 10 years of his life to learning, yet he felt no closer to enlightenment than when he first arrived. It was then that Run approached him and said something unexpected. Tomorrow, I will answer one final question for you. Choose wisely. Kaito's heart pounded. A lifetime of searching, reduced to a single moment. He thought of all the questions he had ever asked. He thought of all the things he still didn't understand. What was the right question to ask? As the night stretched on, Kaito realized something troubling. For all his searching, for all his years of relentless questioning, he still didn't know what he was truly looking for. And the next morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, Kaito stood before his master, still unsure of what to ask. As the first rays of sunlight illuminated the monastery, Kaito stood before his master, his mind racing. Ren sat quietly under the ancient Bodhi tree, his expression serene, waiting. Have you chosen your question? The master asked. Kaito swallowed. He had spent the entire night trying to craft the perfect question, something that would finally unlock the answers he had been seeking for years. But now, standing in front of Run, his mind felt blank. Should he ask about the nature of existence, the meaning of suffering, the path to ultimate peace? He took a deep breath and finally spoke. Master, after all these years of searching, why do I still feel lost? Run smiled a warm, knowing smile. Because you have spent your life looking outward, Kaito, and not inward. Kaito frowned. But I have meditated, studied, and devoted myself entirely to understanding the truth. Isn't that looking inward? Ren shook his head. No, my son. You have sought answers in words, books, and the wisdom of others. But the truth cannot be handed to you. It must be realized within yourself. Kaido felt a sudden wave of frustration. Had he wasted 10 years chasing something that could never be given? Then what is the answer? He pressed. Ren closed his eyes for a moment, then looked at Kaido with deep compassion. The answer is not something I can give you. It is something you must discover when you stop searching. Kaido felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Stop searching? How could he stop searching when he had dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of wisdom? But before he could ask anything else, Ren simply nodded and stood up. Now, Kaido, your real journey begins. And with that, his master walked away, leaving him alone with a question far greater than the one he had asked. Kaido stood motionless, watching as his master disappeared down the stone path, his robes flowing gently in the breeze. Now your real journey begins. The words echoed in his mind, repeating like a mantra he couldn't escape. He had spent 10 years seeking answers, only to be told that the search itself was what kept him lost. For the first time, Kaido felt truly alone. For days, he wandered the monastery in silence. He no longer sought wisdom from scriptures or asked his fellow monks for guidance. Instead, he simply observed. At first, his thoughts resisted. His mind, so accustomed to seeking, kept forming new questions, new doubts. What does it mean to stop searching? How can I find the answer without asking? What if I never understand? But then something curious happened. One afternoon, as he sat beneath the same Bodhi tree where his master had once guided him, he noticed a small droplet of water sliding down a leaf. It hesitated at the tip before finally letting go, falling into a pool below. In that moment, something inside him shifted. The drop had not struggled. It had not resisted. It had simply let go when the time was right. And then he understood. He had spent years grasping for understanding, desperate to force enlightenment upon himself. But wisdom was not something to be seized. It was something to be received. The more he tried to capture it, the more it eluded him. The answer would not come in a single moment of revelation. It would come naturally, like the falling drop, when he was ready to let go of his need to control it. For the first time in his life, Kaido did not search for meaning. He simply was. And in that stillness, he felt something he had never felt before, a quiet knowing. He didn't have the answer yet, but now he understood how to find it. Kaido continued his days in quiet contemplation, allowing himself to simply exist without the weight of endless questions. He no longer sought wisdom as something to acquire. He let it come to him in its own time. Months passed. Then, one morning, an elder monk approached him. The master wishes to see you. Kaido's heart pounded. He had not spoken to his master since that day by the Bodhi tree. Had he finally found the answer? He followed the monk up the long stone steps to the temple's meditation hall, where his master sat in stillness, his eyes closed as if he had been expecting him. Kaido bowed deeply. His master opened his eyes and, after a long silence, finally spoke. Are you ready for your final question? Kaido took a breath, steadying himself. Yes, master. His master nodded. What is the sound of a single hand clapping? The question struck Kaido like lightning. He had heard of this riddle before, a koan, a paradox meant to break the mind free from conventional thought. He had always thought it was impossible to answer. But now he saw it differently. For years, he would have struggled, trying to form a clever response, searching for the right answer. But today, he did not seek an answer. He simply let the questions settle within him. Then he smiled. Kaido slowly lifted his hand and extended it forward. Without making a sound, the master's face remained expressionless for a moment. Then he too smiled. Good. That was all he said. And Kaido understood. Some questions are not meant to be answered with words. Some truths can only be experienced. And for the first time, Kaido heard the silence, and within it, he heard everything. Kaido sat in quiet reflection, his master's approving smile still fresh in his mind. For years, he had chased answers, believing that wisdom was something to be grasped like a distant star. But now he understood. True wisdom was not in seeking, but in being. The old master closed his eyes for a long moment, his breath slow and steady. Then he spoke his final lesson. Kaido, you have spent years searching for answers. But tell me, what have you truly found? Kaido let the questions settle within him. He could have spoken of discipline, patience, or silence. He could have shared stories of his struggles and realizations. But he didn't. Instead, he bowed his head and whispered, "Nothing." The master let out a soft chuckle. "Good." Kaido lifted his gaze. The old man continued, "To find nothing is to free yourself from everything. The moment you stop clinging to answers, you become ready to receive them." Kaido felt something shift within him, as if the very core of his being had expanded. "You are ready," the master said. "But remember, the path does not end here. Every step you take from this moment forward is still part of the journey. Do not seek to finish it, only to walk it well." The sun began to set, casting golden light through the temple windows. Kaido bowed one last time. For the first time, he was not bowing to seek wisdom. He was bowing because he had found peace. His master, the man who had guided him through years of struggle and growth, gave a final nod. Then, he closed his eyes once more, and Kaido knew this was the last lesson he would receive. The master had spoken his final words, and yet, his teachings would never leave him. Kaido stood at the edge of the monastery, the vast horizon stretching endlessly before him. The cool mountain wind brushed against his skin, carrying whispers of the lessons he had learned. His master was gone, but his wisdom remained. For years, Kaido had searched for something, some ultimate truth, some grand realization that would give him clarity. But in the end, the most profound lesson had been the simplest one. He had never needed to seek. The answers had always been within him. He thought about the other monks, the younger students who would now walk the same path he had taken. He remembered the frustration of being lost in his own mind, chasing after knowledge when all he needed to do was listen. And now, standing there in silence, he finally understood. His master's last words echoed in his mind. "Do not seek to finish the journey, only to walk it well." He took a deep breath. Then, without hesitation, he turned and walked back inside the temple. Not because he had found the final answer, but because he no longer needed one. Now ask yourself, what answers are you chasing? Are you searching for something outside of yourself, when maybe the wisdom is already within? If this story made you reflect, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you want to continue exploring transformative lessons like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because sometimes the greatest lessons come when we stop searching and simply listen. Because the real journey isn't about finding all the answers. It's about learning how to ask the right questions. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. Until next time, stay present and remember, the answers you seek may already be closer than you think.